You know, we think of empires being built with steel and stone, with massive armies clashing on the battlefield. But so often, they were brought down by something much, much quieter, something that could fit in a single drop of wine. Today, we are diving into history's most silent and maybe most effective weapon, royal poison.
Just let that sink in for a second. More dynasties collapsed because of a suspicious drink than a massive battlefield defeat. This one sentence really captures the hidden terror that was just lurking in every single ancient royal court.
And that was the whisper behind countless royal deaths. A king gets a sudden fever, a queen has a lingering stomachache. So easy to just blame on fate or bad luck. But for so many, it was actually a carefully planned execution, a perfect crime, completely disguised as natural causes.
So what was it about poison that made it the ultimate tool of political intrigue? Well, it wasn't just about the killing. It was about killing with absolute, total deniability.
I mean, just look at the difference here. A sword is basically a declaration of war. It's loud, it's messy, it needs force. But poison? Poison is a ghost. It doesn't need an army, it makes no sound, and it lets the killer just melt right back into the shadows.
And this is what made it so strategically genius. It created that all-important reasonable doubt. Was it the plague, bad food, or was it the queen herself? The beauty of it, at least from the killer's point of view, was that it could be slipped into a cup by a trusted servant, a physician, even a lover. And you had total control over the timing. You could go for a swift end or a slow, agonizing decline that looked exactly like a natural illness.
Now, this wasn't just guesswork. The people who wielded these substances were masters of a pretty dark and sophisticated science. So let's take a look inside their arsenal. Yeah, you gotta forget that image of some cloaked villain cackling over a cauldron. The ancient poisoner was more like a proto-chemist, an alchemist with a terrifyingly specific area of expertise. They knew exactly which plant, which mineral, or which venom to use to create the effect they wanted, turning Mother Nature into the perfect murder weapon.
And here are just a few of their favorite tools of the trade. You've got aconite, which could cause paralysis. Hemlock, which was famously used on Socrates, just shuts down the entire nervous system. And can you imagine the political power of something like nightshade? It could make a rival ruler seem like they were insane or divinely cursed. But the real king of poisons, the big one, was arsenic. For centuries, it was the perfect killer, almost impossible to detect, with symptoms that looked exactly like common diseases like cholera.
Of course, just having the poison, that was only half the battle. The true art was in the delivery. I mean, how do you get a king to willingly drink his own death warrant?
You hide it in plain sight. A bitter toxin mixed into a heavily spiced wine or a rich stew would be completely masked. But the delivery could be even more subtle than that. A poison mixed into perfume could be absorbed right through the skin, or a hollow ring could deliver a fatal dose with a simple handshake. It's this world where everyday objects become deadly weapons.
See, a fast death was often way too suspicious. The true masters, they preferred the slow burn. By giving someone tiny doses over weeks or even months, the victim would just appear to have some long natural illness. By the time they finally died, everyone would just nod and say, "Oh, what a tragedy," and the poisoner was completely in the clear.
And make no mistake, this was a profession, and it had its superstars. In ancient Rome, a woman named Locusta became the go-to poisoner for the imperial family. She was so good that she would actually test and refine her lethal concoctions on slaves just to perfect the dosage and timing. She made sure her clients got exactly the result they paid for. It was methodical, it was scientific, and it was absolutely ruthless.
Okay, so with all this in mind, we can now look back at some of history's most famous deaths and see them in a new light. Maybe not as tragedies, but as cold cases where poison is still the #1 suspect.
First up, Alexander the Great. Here's a guy who, at just 32, had conquered the entire known world. Then, all of a sudden, he's struck down by this long fever and intense stomach pain. The second he dies, his generals start tearing his empire apart. The timing was, well, let's just say it was convenient.
So, what was it, malaria? Typhoid fever? Or were his symptoms a perfect match for a slow-acting plant poison, maybe administered by a rival who wanted his throne? The debate is still raging about this one.
All right, now let's jump forward to the heart of the Roman Empire.
Emperor Claudius dies right after eating his favorite meal, a dish of mushrooms, and his death just so happens to pave the way for one of history's most notorious tyrants, his stepson Nero, to take the throne.
For centuries, historians have suspected his very ambitious wife, Agrippina, served him a plate of delicious but deadly mushrooms. So, was it just an unfortunate accident? Or was it the final move in a deadly game of chess for control of the world's greatest empire?
You know, these cases are still unsolved for a very good reason. These ancient poisonings weren't just murders. They were designed from the very beginning to be the perfect, unsolvable crime.
The whole system was basically built to erase the evidence. Bodies were often cremated, which would destroy any chemical traces. Funerals were rushed to solidify the new line of succession. Doctors? They could be bribed or threatened into recording the death as a fever or the plague. And most cleverly, the poisoners themselves, the only ones who knew the real truth, were often killed to tie up any loose ends.
And that leaves us with this final, chilling thought. A king could build massive walls to keep out entire armies, but he could never fully protect himself from the enemy within. The real threat wasn't the soldier holding a sword, it was the trusted advisor, the loyal servant, maybe even the loving family member with a tiny vial hidden up their sleeve. The ultimate power, it turns out, wasn't wielded on the battlefield, but in the shadows of the royal court.